Long before heroes filled the pages of legend, there was a prophecy, a hidden child, and a monster whose gaze could turn the world to stone. Tonight, we return to one of the oldest stories ever told. The story of Perseus and Medusa. You know the stories are there, waiting quietly on the shelves of time. Ancient tales carried across centuries, told beside fires, beneath temples, and under open skies. Tonight, we open one of those stories again. A story from the lands of ancient Greece. A land of marble temples, of restless seas, and of gods who sometimes walked unseen among mortals. It is a story of prophecy, of courage, and of a hero who would one day face a creature whose gaze could turn men into stone. This is the story of Perseus. Long ago, in the ancient land of Argus, there stood a kingdom overlooking the shining sea. White marble walls rose above the cliffs, their columns glowing softly beneath the warm Mediterranean sun. Ships drifted in the harbor below. Farmers worked the distant hills, and life moved peacefully through the streets of the city. This land was ruled by a king named Perseus. He was a powerful ruler, a man who had defended his throne through many years of war and politics. Yet even the strongest kings cannot rule forever. And as the seasons passed, quiet worry began to grow in his mind. For King Perseus had no son, only one child, a daughter named Dana. From the high balcony of his palace, Perseus often looked out across the sea. The wind moved gently between the columns, carrying the scent of salt and distant waves. But the king's thoughts were not on the beauty of his kingdom. Instead, he wondered what would happen after he was gone. Who would rule Argus then? Who would carry the crown of his house into the future? These questions slowly troubled him, more and more with each passing year. And so, like many rulers before him, he turned to the ancient temples of prophecy. Leaving the palace behind, King Perseus traveled into the mountains. The path wound through rocky valleys and olive-covered hills. At last, he reached the sacred temple of the oracle. It was an ancient place. Stone steps worn smooth by countless pilgrims, columns rising silently toward the sky, and a quiet atmosphere that seemed to hold the whispers of the future. For generations, kings and travelers had come here seeking answers. Yet the answers given by the oracle were rarely easy to hear. Inside the temple, dim torchlight flickered against the stone walls. Incense smoke drifted slowly through the air. The oracle listened to the king's question. And then, in a voice that echoed softly through the chamber, she spoke the prophecy. You will have no son, but your daughter, Dana, will one day bear a child. A son who will bring about your downfall. The words hung in the air, like a shadow that could not be chased away. Yet in the ancient world, words spoken by an oracle were never taken lightly. In the ancient world of Greece, prophecies were taken very seriously. Kings and rulers often traveled great distances to consult the oracles. These temples were believed to be places where the gods themselves could speak through human voices. Yet the answers they gave were rarely simple. Prophecy did not always tell people what would happen. Sometimes it revealed the fears that already lived inside their hearts. And for King Acrisius, prophecy of a grandson who would destroy him became a shadow that followed him everywhere. When the king left the temple, the mountains seemed colder than before. The prophecy followed him all the way back to his palace. A grandson, a child who would one day destroy him. The more he thought about it, the more dangerous the future appeared. Fear has a strange power. It can twist wisdom and turn caution into cruelty. And slowly, an idea formed in the king's mind. If Dana could never meet a man, then the prophecy could never come true. And so the king gave an order. A great tower of bronze was built beside the cliffs of the sea. Its walls were smooth and tall. Its doors sealed tight. And its only opening was a narrow window high above the ground. There, Princess Dana was locked away from the world. The king believed the tower would keep fate itself at bay. But destiny, as many have learned, is not easily imprisoned. Days passed quietly within the tower. Dana sat beside the narrow window, watching the distant horizon. From that small opening, she could see only a strip of sky and the endless blue line of the sea. The wind carried the sound of waves against the cliffs below. And though the world continued beyond the walls, Dana remained alone in the silent chamber. Yet even in solitude, life has a way of changing unexpectedly. Far above the tower, clouds drifted slowly across the night sky. And among the gods of Olympus, one figure had noticed the lonely princess below. Zeus, king of the gods. Where mortals saw only walls, the gods saw no barrier at all. For the plans of kings mean very little to the rulers of the heavens. One quiet night, something strange appeared inside the tower. A soft golden light drifted down through the narrow window. It shimmered like falling rain, glowing gently in the darkness of the chamber. The light filled the room with warmth and quiet wonder. For this was Zeus himself, entering the tower in a form no wall could block. And from that divine moment, a child would soon be born. When morning came, the tower was no longer silent. Dana held a newborn child in her arms. The boy's small hands reached toward the light that streamed through the window. She named him Perseus. Yet far beyond the tower walls, the prophecy still waited patiently. For the child whose life had just begun was the very one the king had feared. The beginnings of heroes in ancient myths were rarely ordinary. Many heroes in Greek mythology begin their lives in unusual ways. Some are born from gods, others from strange miracles, and many begin their journeys in danger or exile. These beginnings were not simply dramatic stories. To the ancient storytellers, they showed that heroes were shaped by hardship, long before their adventures truly began. Perseus, drifting across the sea as a helpless infant, was already traveling the first step of his destiny. When the king returned to the tower, he expected to find only silence. Instead, he heard the soft cry of a child. Inside the chamber, Dana stood beside the window, holding the infant Perseus. For a moment, Acrisius said nothing. The words of the oracle echoed once more in his mind. The prophecy had already begun. Fear quickly hardened into a terrible decision. The king did not dare kill his daughter, but neither could he allow the child to grow within his kingdom. So he ordered a large wooden chest to be built, strong enough to carry 2 people, and heavy enough to disappear into the sea. That night, Dana and the infant Perseus were placed inside the chest and carried toward the cliffs. Under the dark sky of night, soldiers carried the wooden chest toward the cliffs above the sea. Torches flickered in the wind, casting long shadows across the rocks. Inside the chest sat Dana and her infant son. The wooden walls creaked softly with each step the soldiers took. Beyond the cliffs, the ocean stretched endlessly into the darkness. The waves below rose and fell with the slow rhythm of the tide. Some of the soldiers hesitated, for even hardened men could feel the cruelty of the moment. But the king's command could not be questioned. At the edge of the cliffs, the soldiers pushed the chest forward. For an instant, it balanced on the rocky ledge. Then gravity claimed it. The chest fell into the darkness below. Moments later, the sea caught it with a heavy splash. The waves closed around the wooden box, lifting it gently upon the surface. Far above, the cliffs of Argus grew smaller and smaller. And slowly, the currents carried Dana and Perseus out into the open sea. All through the night, the chest drifted upon the water. Above it, the sky stretched wide and full of stars. The moon rose slowly, casting a pale path of light across the waves. The sea was vast and silent. No ship guided their course. No voice called out across the darkness. Only the wind and the restless movement of the ocean. Yet the chest did not sink. It floated steadily, as though unseen hands were guiding it toward another shore. When dawn finally arrived, the waves carried the chest toward a distant island. The rising sun painted the sky with gentle gold and pale blue. Along the shore, a fisherman named Dictys walked beside the water. He noticed something unusual resting among the rocks. A wooden chest, tossed there by the tide. Curious, he pulls it open. Inside he found Dana and the child. Exhausted, but alive. The island where they arrived was small and peaceful. White houses stood near the harbor. Fishing boats drifted quietly on the calm water. Olive trees covered the hills, their leaves moving gently in the sea breeze. Here, far from the palace of Argus, Dana and her son found safety. Dictys welcomed them into his home, with kindness and generosity. And so Perseus began to grow up beside the sea. Years passed quietly on the island. The small boy who had once drifted across the ocean in a wooden chest slowly became a young man. Perseus learned to fish in the blue waters of the bay. He climbed the rocky cliffs that rose above the shore. He ran along the narrow paths between the olive trees. Those who met him often noticed something unusual. There was a strength in him beyond his years, and a calm confidence that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the island itself. Sometimes Perseus stood alone on the high cliffs above the sea. From there, the horizon stretched endlessly in every direction. Ships appeared only as tiny shapes against the distant water. The wind moved through his cloak as he watched the waves below. Though he had grown up on this quiet island, part of him always wondered what lay beyond the far horizon. He did not yet know that his life would soon carry him far beyond these peaceful shores. The island itself had a ruler, King Polydex. He ruled the land from a marble hall above the harbor. Often he visited the fisherman's home, where Dana lived. But his visits were not made out of kindness. For when Polydex looked upon Dana, he saw not a guest, but a woman he wished to possess. Only one obstacle stood in his way: her son. One evening, King Polydex held a great banquet in his palace hall. Torches burned brightly between the tall marble columns. Guests filled the long tables, speaking loudly of gifts they intended to present to the king. Fine horses, golden cups, armor forged by skilled craftsmen. Perseus sat quietly among them. Unlike the others, he possessed no riches to offer. And the king had been waiting for that moment. Polydex turned toward the young man with a curious smile. "And you, Perseus," he said, "what gift will you bring your king?" The hall grew quiet. Perseus answered simply, "If there is something you desire, I will bring it." The king leaned back in his chair. "Very well," he said slowly. "Bring me the head of Medusa." The room fell silent. Everyone present knew the terrible name. Medusa was one of the Gorgons, creature whose gaze could turn living men into lifeless stone. Many warriors had attempted to defeat her. None had returned. Yet Perseus, young and fearless, had already given his word. The name Medusa carried a long history in the myths of Greece. Medusa herself was one of the most fascinating figures in Greek mythology. Some early stories describe her simply as a monster, creature feared by all who heard her name. But later, traditions tell a more tragic story. They say Medusa was once a beautiful young woman who served in the temple of Athena. After angering the goddess, she was transformed into the serpent-haired being known as the Gorgon. Whether monster or victim, Medusa became a powerful symbol in the ancient world. a reminder that beauty, power, and danger can sometimes exist together. That night, Perseus walked alone beneath the stars. The sea moved quietly in the darkness. Above him, the sky stretched wide and endless. The task before him seemed impossible. And yet, every great story begins with a single step. For Perseus did not know it yet. The gods themselves had already begun to watch over his journey. That same night, as Perseus walked along the quiet shore, a soft light appeared beside him. At first it seemed like moonlight reflected upon the water. But the light grew brighter and slowly took the form of a tall and radiant figure. It was Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy. For Athena had watched the young hero since the beginning of his life. She knew the king's challenge was meant not as a test, but as a trap. Yet courage such as Perseus possessed was not easily ignored by the gods. And so Athena spoke gently to him. "You cannot defeat Medusa by strength alone," as she said, "but with wisdom, and with the right tools, your path may still lead to victory." As Athena's words faded into the night air, another presence appeared beside them. Swift Hermes, messenger of the gods. His winged sandals barely touched the ground as he approached the young hero. Hermes carried knowledge of distant places and secrets hidden across the world. Together, the two gods explained what Perseus must do next. For before he could reach Medusa, he would first need to find the strange sisters known as the Grae, creatures as mysterious as the Gorgons themselves. Far from the lands of ordinary men lived three ancient sisters. They were known as the Grae, the Gray Ones. No one could say exactly how old they were. Some believed they had been born before the rise of the great kingdoms of Greece. The three sisters shared a single eye and a single tooth. Only one sister could see at a time. And yet they guarded the secret path to the Gorgons' hidden land. Perseus approached them carefully. The sisters sat together among dark rocks and shifting mist. One of them held the eye in her hand, peering across the empty land. Then she passed it to another sister. At that very moment, Perseus moved swiftly. Before the eye could change hands again, he seized it. Suddenly, the sisters were blind. They cried out in confusion and anger. But Perseus spoke calmly. "Tell me the path to Medusa's lair, and you shall have your eye returned." With no other choice, the Grae revealed the secret. They spoke of a distant valley, hidden beyond the edges of the known world. Place where broken temples and ancient ruins stood beneath the cold light of the moon. There, among the silent stones, the Gorgons lived. Perseus returned the eye to the sisters as promised. And without another word, he began the final stage of his journey. The path ahead grew darker with every mile Perseus traveled. Mountains rose like black shadows against the sky. The wind whispered through narrow valleys. Few travelers had ever come this far. Even the birds seemed to avoid the region. For somewhere ahead waited the creature, whose name alone could fill warriors with fear. Medusa. As Perseus crossed the final ridge, a strange sight appeared before him. Figures of stone stood scattered across the valley floor. At first glance, they seemed like ordinary statues. But the details were too real. A warrior frozen mid-step, another with his shield raised, a third reaching forward, as though trying to flee. These had once been living men, and every one of them had looked directly at Medusa. Beyond the valley stood the remains of an ancient temple. Its marble columns had long since fallen. Cracks ran through the stone floor, and vines crept across the ruins. Perseus lowered his eyes and lifted the mirror-like shield before his face. From now on, he would see the world only through its reflection. Step by careful step, he entered the silent temple. There, among the broken columns and scattered statues, lay Medusa. Even in sleep, she was terrifying to behold. Her body rested upon the cold stone floor, half hidden among the ruins. And where ordinary hair should have been, dark serpents coiled and shifted slowly. The moonlight touched their scales as they moved in the night air. This was the creature whose gaze had ended the lives of countless warriors. Perseus did not look directly at the sleeping Gorgon. Instead, he watched the reflection in Athena's shield. The polished bronze showed Medusa's form, as if it were a distant image in water. Holding the shield steady, Perseus drew the sword given to him by Hermes. The temple was silent. The moment had finally arrived. All around him, the stone statues seemed to watch. Warriors who had come seeking glory. Travelers who had hoped to defeat the Gorgon. None of them had succeeded. Now their silent forms stood as witnesses to what would happen next. Perseus raised his sword and prepared for the single strike that would decide his fate. Guided only by the reflection in the shining shield, Perseus moved. His sword flashed once through the moonlit air. And in that brief moment, the terrible power of the Gorgon came to an end. For a moment after the strike, the ruined temple was completely still. The wind moved quietly between the broken columns. Dust drifted slowly across the ancient stone floor. Perseus remained motionless, his eyes still lowered toward the shining shield. Only when several long breaths had passed did he carefully step back. The danger that had ended so many lives before him was finally gone. Yet something unexpected began to stir within the ruins. From the place where Medusa had fallen, a powerful movement broke the silence. Light shimmered briefly in the moonlit air. And from that strange moment, a magnificent creature emerged. A great white horse with wings wide as the sky. Its feathers caught the pale light of the moon as it rose gracefully into the air. This was Pegasus, creature born of divine magic and ancient myth. The appearance of Pegasus may seem surprising in the story. Yet in Greek myth, the birth of new creatures from divine events was not unusual. Pegasus would later become one of the most famous creatures in mythology. The winged horse was said to carry heroes and gods across the skies, and was often associated with inspiration and poetry. In later legends, Pegasus would even help create sacred springs with a single strike of his hoof. For the storytellers of ancient Greece, such creatures reminded listeners that the world was filled with wonders beyond ordinary imagination. But far across the valley, another sound began to echo. The other Gorgon sisters had awakened. Their voices moved through the night like distant thunder. They searched the ruins for the one who had slain their sister. Their serpents hissed softly in the darkness. But Perseus had already begun to move. Quickly he placed the Gorgon's head inside a special leather pouch given to him by the gods. Then he fastened the winged sandals to his feet. With a powerful leap, Perseus rose into the night sky. The wind rushed past him as the temple ruins grew smaller below. The Gorgon sisters searched the valley in fury. The hero was already far beyond their reach. High above the dark waters, Perseus traveled through the silent sky. The sea below reflected the quiet light of the stars. Clouds drifted slowly beneath him. For the first time since the quest began, the young hero felt the weight of the journey lifting from his shoulders. The impossible task had been completed. And now, he was finally returning home. As dawn approached, the distant shape of his island appeared along the horizon. Golden light slowly spread across the calm water. Fishing boats rocked gently in the harbor below. To the people of the island, the morning seemed like any other. But Perseus returned, not as a fisherman's son, but as a hero who had defeated a monster of legend. Perseus walked once more along the familiar paths of the village. The houses looked the same. The sea breeze carried the same scent of salt and distant waves. Yet everything felt different, for the journey had changed him. The quiet island, where he had grown up, was only the beginning of a much larger story. At last Perseus entered the palace of King Polydex. The king sat confidently upon his throne, believing the young hero had never survived the quest. Around him, his followers laughed and spoke carelessly. None of them expected what Perseus had brought with him. Without a word, Perseus revealed the terrible power he carried in the pouch. King and his followers looked upon the face of Medusa, and instantly, their laughter vanished. One by one, their bodies hardened into stone. Their final expressions, frozen forever in marble silence. Thus the cruel rule of Polydex came to an end. Time moved forward, as it always does. Perseus became known, throughout the lands of Greece, as a hero of great courage. Stories of his journey spread from city to city. Yet somewhere in the background, the prophecy spoken long ago still lingered quietly. Many years later, Perseus attended a gathering of athletes and warriors. During the games, he stepped forward to throw a heavy discus into the open field. The spinning disc rose high into the sky, higher than anyone expected. Then it began to fall toward the watching crowd. Among the spectators stood an old man, a man who had once ruled the kingdom of Argos, King Acrisius. By cruel chance, the discus struck him, and in that single moment, the prophecy spoken long ago finally came true. For despite every effort to escape fate, Acrisius had been undone by the grandson he had once tried to destroy. The story of Perseus was told throughout the ancient Mediterranean world for many centuries. Sculptors carved scenes of the hero into temple walls. Poets wrote about his adventures, and travelers repeated the story as they moved from one city to another. Even today, thousands of years later, Perseus remains one of the most remembered heroes of Greek mythology. His journey continues to appear in books, paintings, and films, proof that some stories never truly disappear. And so the story comes quietly to its end. The waves continue to move across the sea. The wind still passes through the hills of Greece, and the ruins of ancient temples remain beneath the open sky. Long after the heroes of old have vanished, the world itself carries on, but the stories remain. They travel across centuries, across languages, across the quiet spaces of human memory. And sometimes, in those stories, we find something of ourselves. The tale of Perseus is not only a story of monsters and heroes, it is also a story about fear. For King Acrisius believed that if he could hide from the future, he could escape it. He built walls, locked doors, and cast a child into the sea. Yet fate, like the tide, cannot be held back forever. And then there is the hero himself. Perseus did not begin life as a prince raised in comfort. He began in a wooden chest, floating across dark waters. His journey was shaped not by power, but by courage, and by the quiet help of those who believed in him. Even the gods, it seems, sometimes favor the brave. Medusa herself, the creature at the center of the legend, remains one of the most mysterious figures in all of Greek myth. Some stories say she was once human. Some say her terrible form was the result of ancient punishment. Others say she was always a creature, born of shadow and magic. But whatever her origin, her story reminds us that even monsters often begin with sorrow. And then there is the hero himself. Perseus did not begin life as a prince raised in comfort. He began in a wooden chest, floating across dark waters. His journey was shaped not by power, but by courage, and by the quiet help of those who believed in him. Even the gods, it seems, sometimes favor the brave. Medusa herself, the creature at the center of the legend, remains one of the most mysterious figures in all of Greek myth. Some stories say she was once human. Some say her terrible form was the result of ancient punishment. Others say she was always a creature, born of shadow and magic. But whatever her origin, her story reminds us that even monsters often begin with sorrow. Perhaps that is the quiet magic of myths. They remind us that the fears and hopes of the past are not so different from our own. Even today, we still face challenges that seem larger than ourselves. And like Perseus, we often move forward without knowing exactly how the journey will end. But the story also offers a gentle reassurance. For Perseus did not face the darkness alone. He received guidance, unexpected help, and the courage to take one step forward when the path seemed uncertain. And sometimes, that is all any of us can do. One step, then another. Now the ancient world grows quiet again. The sea drifts softly against the shore. Olive trees move gently in the evening wind. And somewhere beneath the stars, the old temples of Greece still stand in silent watch. So let the story rest now. Let the heroes return to their distant age of myth. Let the wind carry their footsteps back into the quiet past. And if you are listening, in the calm of your own night, may the world around you grow just a little more peaceful. May your thoughts settle slowly, like waves returning to the sea, like mist drifting across distant hills. For now, the story is complete. The ancient world sleeps beneath the stars. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, another story waits patiently to be told. Until then, rest well.